Well guys, clearly the reality of All Elite Wrestling is starting to take great effect to Vince McMahon's mind over the past month or so, because as we had summarized in a number of our recent videos, McMahon and the upper WWE management are becoming desperate to not only hold on to their talent at all costs, despite a wrestler's obvious desire to leave, two of the most recent examples being Luke Harper and Sasha Banks, as well as even making sure a now retired legend like Kurt Angle remains signed to the WWE, but to also bring back as many big names as they possibly can to avoid any major signings for AEW, because as most of you guys are well aware, comparable to the WWE, All Elite Wrestling has the same, if not more financial backing behind the company itself, which has enabled AEW to be a legitimate rival for the WWE when it comes to luring big wrestling names over to the company, and Chris Jericho is only the beginning of this trend. Unfortunately for Vince McMahon, his efforts of offering Dean Ambrose a lucrative and equally flexible return contract failed, and Dean Ambrose, aka Jon Moxley, is now almost guaranteed to make his presence felt at AEW's upcoming show Double or Nothing, a reality that had reportedly caused Vince to have been quite emotional backstage during this past week's episode of SmackDown Live upon hearing the news. However, Vinnie Mac is definitely not slowing down 1 second when it comes to adding some much needed star power to the WWE's rosters, and as many of you have likely heard, Vince has re-signed not only the Beast Incarnate Brock Lesnar to yet another huge contract, but he has also convinced The Undertaker to return to the WWE at the Saudi Arabia show on June 7th, and beyond that, which we will discuss in greater detail shortly, as well as convincing the former Universal Champion Goldberg to re-sign with the WWE, and while his imminent big appearance will be at the Crown Jewel show in early June, we have been informed that Vince McMahon has big plans for Goldberg lasting well beyond the Saudi show. On top of all this, as we had reported to you guys earlier in the week, Vince has also been trying very hard to get in contact with yet another big name over a new WWE contract, and that man is CM Punk. The WWE are apparently very keen on the idea of bringing back the Cult of Personality, even if it means dishing out a heavy lucrative offer to Punk, who had previously been in both Vince McMahon's and Triple H's bad books, indicating that these two are more than willing to put their personal differences aside with Punk in the name of big business. Whether or not Punk is on the same page as Hunter and McMahon is still relatively unclear, though one of our sources has mentioned that Vince refuses to cooperate with the possibility of CM Punk joining All Elite Wrestling, as there's speculation backstage that it would be far too big of a signing for AEW and it would put the WWE in a potentially vulnerable position. To add a bit of backstory on why Vince McMahon has all of a sudden been pushing very hard to bring back big former WWE superstars, we should bring up the fact that this week, the WWE hit two unfortunate milestones. The lowest viewership in not only Raw's history, but SmackDown Live as well suffered the same fate this week with a record low viewership. Now when we look at this past week's Raw and SmackDown Live, while they definitely weren't standout shows by any stretch, they weren't noticeably bad, perhaps not a compliment considering many of the WWE's main roster shows have been rather dry and lacking fresh creative decisions for quite some time. But McMahon has apparently been very concerned with the overall continued drop in viewership and ratings since WrestleMania 35. Because as one of our sources has pointed out, Vince is now a firm believer that Raw and SmackDown Live simply lack enough star power to gain the attention of the casual WWE fans, despite pushing three crowd favorites to the top spots at WrestleMania, those wrestlers being the WWE Champion Kofi Kingston, the Raw and SmackDown Live Women's Champion Becky Lynch, and the current Universal Champion Seth Rollins. Although some WWE executives were trying to inform Vince McMahon recently that a major reason for the dwindling audience is due to a poorly received product because of a major lack of creativity, despite the company pushing the fan favorites, but we have been informed that McMahon is refusing to believe this notion and is now with the belief that the WWE's current top stars, again Kofi, Becky, and Seth, aren't draws for the WWE, regardless of the fans seemingly desiring to see them at the pinnacle of WWE. As a result, Vince McMahon has been pushing hard of the idea of spreading out a couple of big name stars such as Brock Lesnar, Goldberg, and The Undertaker, and hopefully CM Punk, to increase the appeal of Raw and SmackDown Live, while also effectively keeping them away from their rival promotion, All Elite Wrestling. Although none of these wrestlers are likely going to be full-time talents, Vince is under the belief that even a couple of special appearances here and there will increase the marketability of their product. To get into further detail regarding the contract details of these three big names, we will first start with Goldberg. Despite stating in the past that he would only return to the WWE under the right circumstances in his perspective, as the old saying goes, money talks. For those of you unaware, the value of Goldberg's upcoming appearance at the Saudi Arabia show is reportedly in the low 7 figures range, most likely close to the 2 million mark. And following the crown jewel-like event, Goldberg would be signed to a contractual agreement with the WWE, which would keep him out of AEW, and Vince would thus pay Goldberg on a per-appearance basis when McMahon sees fit, whether on Raw, SmackDown Live, or pay-per-view. The apparent belief where Goldberg is concerned is that Vince doesn't want AEW to have a mainstream star like Goldberg on their roster, which could lead to fans tuning into All Elite Wrestling's future television shows. As far as Brock Lesnar is concerned, the latest backstage news is that Lesnar decided to retire from the sport of MMA suddenly, despite his rumored fight against Daniel Cormier in August, due to Vince's desperate yet enticing offer to return to the WWE as soon as possible, and that return date being the Saudi show on June 7th. Unlike Goldberg, Brock Lesnar is apparently in the process of signing a deal almost identical to the one he had up until WrestleMania 35. And there were talks backstage at the meeting between Brock Lesnar and Vince McMahon the other day that Lesnar would be working with the company up until WrestleMania 36, which is allegedly the date that Brock Lesnar is planning to hang up the boots for good, which means that in the meantime, Brock Lesnar will be back to making his sporadic appearances, most likely on SmackDown Live exclusively this time around, due to the WWE SmackDown television deal with Fox Sports, which is set to come into effect this October. And as you might have guessed, Roman Reigns is now one of the rumored stars who could be feuding with Lesnar sometime this year, and perhaps into WrestleMania 36 season. Though don't be surprised if Vince decides to move ahead with a dream match or feud for some fans, that being Lars Sullivan versus the Beast Incarnate at some point in the not so distant future, perhaps with Lesnar putting over Sullivan in his final match to establish Lars Sullivan as a WWE's future monster, despite some fans believing that Lars is nothing more than Gene Snitsky 2.0. Make sure you let us know down in the comment section below if you feel as though Lars Sullivan is worthy of being Brock Lesnar's final feud in the WWE, and whether or not he has what it takes to essentially replace Brock. Now, as far as The Undertaker is concerned, if you hadn't known, the dead man had signed an interesting deal he clearly couldn't refuse with the WWE back in mid-April for a high 7-figure sum, one that restricts Taker from making appearances outside the company, and Taker's first in-ring appearance since re-signing with the WWE will be in Saudi Arabia. However, with the ultra-low viewership crisis that WWE has been faced with since WrestleMania 35, Vince McMahon reportedly has plans of inserting The Undertaker into more storylines in between now and WrestleMania 36, most likely appearing in some capacity for the build-up to SummerSlam this year. With all this being said, regardless of the fact that Vince McMahon has basically removed the risk of 3 huge stars in Brock, Taker, or Goldberg deciding to accept a potential deal with AEW in the near future, as we had mentioned, Vince McMahon is very adamant about convincing CM Punk to return to the WWE, with one source speculating that Vince had recently got in contact and apologized to CM Punk for the way things had ended during his infamous exit from the company, essentially trying to eliminate any animosity Punk has towards the WWE, with the obvious secondary motive of CM Punk possibly deciding to consider Vince McMahon's reported high 7-figure offer with a contract that would give CM Punk perks that no full-time talent has on the WWE's roster, namely the ability to pursue business opportunities outside the WWE without the written or verbal permission of Vince McMahon and the company. In a simple way of summarizing Vince McMahon's desire to have CM Punk back, McMahon is basically trying to make Punk an offer he cannot refuse. Whatever the case may be, despite the fact that Vince McMahon has managed to convince 3 big stars to return, and possibly getting CM Punk to join them, if the WWE continue to book their main roster shows the way they have been lately, which have undoubtedly been the main culprit of the poor ratings and viewership lately, the shine and glitter of a big name returning will wear its welcome very quickly, and the WWE will once again be faced with their viewership issues again. And considering Vince is reportedly unwilling to budge when it comes to how he runs his shows, All Elite Wrestling is definitely destined to pose as a viable alternative for most fans, much like how WCW was back in the mid-90s before McMahon was forced to drastically change things up and move ahead with the Attitude Era. And perhaps McMahon will have to make that decision again once AEW truly comes into effect. Well guys, with all this news being said, are you happy that Vince McMahon—
If you smell what the Rock is cooking?